Welcome, everybody. Let's get started. All right, we want to keep it going because I know that there's going to be a lot of interest and questions. And thank you for being here. This is a great participation in this process that we're all very interested in. My name is Jim Marrill. Jane McCabe, who's sitting right here, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Just a little bit before we begin, this town hall model began in Willits through the Willits Community Alliance, and we've recently reframed it to include the 95490 community to be more inclusive of the people who live not just strictly in the city. We're interested in working towards a collective community process that includes all points of view, so thank you all for being here. We encourage your participation in the ongoing development and planning of this town hall process. If you have ideas about topics you would like this committee to consider, please contact anyone on the Town Hall Planning Committee. And for those committee members, please stand so that you can get recognized, please. And that includes Jack and Patricia Bauman, Carol Hughes, myself, Jane McCabe, April Tweddell. We have approximately 8 minutes per speaker. And then followed by an hour of community questions, comments, followed by about 10 to 15 minutes of community announcements. The topic today is how you think the legalization of marijuana, should that occur, would affect our 95490 community. We realize this is a big topic which we can't hope to examine thoroughly today, but we can kick it off. Okay? And we have three special speakers who are going to start that off for us. And they are Casey O'Neill, who's a farmer, and he is also a representative of Emerald Growers Association. And he is going to give his thoughts and ideas and visions of where this kind of issue and the general community may go with this. And then we have Jane Futcher, published author and writer from Mendocino County Observer in Laytonville on cannabis, and you're starting the Cannabis show in KZYX pretty soon, right? Okay. And then Holly Madrigal, our city council woman and former mayor, who's going to give us possible policies and visions for our community. So we're going to get started here, and first up is Mr. O'Neill.
So for me, as a farmer, as a community member, as a son of this county, this area, it's a tremendous pleasure to be here, to be having this conversation, to be talking about, how are we going to move forward? And it's a question of, regardless of how you feel about cannabis, we need to address it as our communities, as our people, as we move forward. We've got to figure out what our stance is and how we're going to deal with it. For me as a farmer, my business has been fundamentally supported by cannabis. We've been able to expand, to grow produce, to provide nourishment to the community because we've also been supported by a cash crop. This has sort of been the quiet thing about our communities forever. 10 years ago, everybody was a gate builder or a plumber or a carpenter. Now everybody talks about being farmers. And we're talking about this concept of daylighting. When you bring things into the light, things, we return the honor to the thing, and we go from criminal grows to farms, to small farms. And that's what this country was based on. That's sort of our agrarian heritage as a populace, is this idea that people would have a little homestead, a farmstead. They would have some crops, they would provide nourishment for themselves, but they would also have a cash crop. And with any industry, there are going to be good actors and bad actors. And because we've had an unregulated industry, there has never been a system of incentive for good actors. And so those of us out there trying to do the good work have just done it because that's what you're supposed to do. That's the right thing to do. But if we have a system, if we can build a system that encourages that kind of practice, then we change the entire dynamic of the way our communities move forward. And for me, growing up here, it's always been a contentious issue. And for the longest time, it wasn't even something we could discuss publicly and positively. It was just one of those things where a deviant label was applied to part of our culture, and that's where we left it. So as we move forward, we've got to figure out, how do we honor the good practices? How do we support the good practices? And as communities, we're going to have to accept that cannabis is here. Is that better? Okay. So, cannabis has been a part of the fabric of rural California life for decades. This isn't something new. We all know this. And figuring out, well, how do we manifest this? How does this begin to support communities for the future in a way that, gives money to schools, gives money to local governments, so that we're able to foster and grow in a way that works for everybody. And so I think all of the problems, all of the issues come back to a question of a lack of regulation. And if we regulate, we figure out a system that honors small farms, the craft heritage that has existed here in this area and really throughout rural California. We create a potential for the future, and that's been, I think for me, the most powerful thing is that as a vegetable producer, I wouldn't do it without cannabis as support. The work is too hard, the labor is too much, and honestly, my back hurts too much. Smoking weed, it makes me feel better. So this medicinal concept, this whole idea of this plant that people grow that makes them feel good. And if we can avoid the values-based judgment about it, we can make a very clear decision as a people about how we want to move forward. And that's been a huge part of my program in sort of coming out and trying to represent sort of the good side of cannabis culture, is to say that, listen, there's a lot of things that we need to work together on, and the only way we're going to do so is to discuss them in a cogent manner. So I think, again, it's just a tremendous pleasure to be here. For me, living out in the hills, Willits is always kind of like, you always kind of think, well, Willits is fairly conservative. So the fact that we're at the town hall having a conversation about marijuana, about cannabis, about this plant that some of our community has very strong feelings about one way and some of our community has very strong feelings the other way, is, really indicative of where we're going and where, the forward movement. And so the question really becomes, how do we maintain this craft heritage that we've built? Because it's a system of small farmers, of micro-scale, individualized production that supports small families, it supports, a quality of life that we as Mendocino County residents have chosen. And the boogeyman or whatever is that the corporate is coming and they're going to grow it all in Central Valley. And, my response to that would be, how many famous wines come from Fresno? You can grow 1 million pounds of grapes in Fresno. They don't make great wine. They make $2 chuck. Fire up 10 acres of OG in the Central Valley and see how it works. So we have a craft heritage, and if you subtract the deviant label that says, well, you're all criminals who just want to grow cannabis because it's easy, and you say, actually, this is a plant that we farm that takes a tremendous amount of love and energy and effort, and to do it well takes real skill and knowledge. And we have created something that is world-renowned. You go anywhere in the world and you say Mendocino County, and they go, oh, and they're not talking about wine. So this is something that we would do well as a community to embrace and say to ourselves, logging went away, and that used to be the boom, and fishing, that's gone too. Cannabis is here. We have the opportunity to stand for it, to coalesce together, and really be able to build something for the future that, whether or not you like cannabis, whether you're for it, if we can build a regulated industry that allows people who provide, who are good operators to exist, that's going to support our community through taxes, it's going to support our schools, and it's going to take away this whole thing of like, some of our kids go to school and have to lie about what their parents do. And some of our kids go to school and it's like, oh, your kid's backpack smells. There has been this whole undercurrent to our communities for decades that has been wrong and has inflicted trauma upon our people in ways that we now have a tremendous power to be able to move forward and address and deal with. And I think, for me, again, I just am really grateful to be here to be able to talk about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's working. Wait, it's very filmy in my brain, and that's why I decided to bring this along. Because as future forecasters, Jane McCabe said, we will be answering how will legalizing cannabis affect our local community, including real estate and business. And I'm adding, will it have a positive effect? Because you have to ask yes and no questions. I'm going to ask Casey to read the first answer. It's very hard. It takes a minute. This is, will it have a positive effect?
This is about the most fitting. Reply hazy. Try again.
Yeah, right. Okay, here's another question. That was the right answer. Do we need to go any further? Okay. I was going to ask Holly, but so it's all working, but we don't really know the answers. I'm honored to be here with Casey O'Neill, who's most of you know, who's been doing all sorts of wonderful things in Laytonville with the Mendocino Cannabis Policy Council and as a small farmer and helping lead, being a leader in cannabis in Mendocino County. He's really been great, and of course, Holly's here, and she's been a very good supporter. We know that it's not going to have a negative effect because we've already consulted this. Unfortunately, Hezekiah Allen, who is a lobbyist for the Emerald Growers Association, is not here, and he is up to speed on everything. And I don't think any of the three of us are you up to speed, Casey?
I can throw a few things out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hezekiah is actually, he's not a lobbyist. He's the executive director of the Emerald Growers Association, and then the association has retained a lobbyist through Nossman Associates. We were over in Sacramento on Wednesday for AB 243, which is Assemblyman Wood's bill, and it's ostensibly an environment bill. And he got into the thing and realized, well, you can't really address the environment in this district without addressing cannabis. We had a symposium in Eureka last weekend, and that was, the title was Marijuana and the Environment, so there was a whole round of speakers, and, we talked about a lot of the bad things, we talked about the good things, and I think everybody's pretty well versed on those things. It's really, a lot of it is that we now have the ability to address it and say trespass grows, bad, criminal water stealing, bad, but small farms, great, that's a good thing. And Assemblyman Wood is open to conversation with us. Emerald Growers Association had a dinner in the Capitol. Assemblyman Wood came by, and it doesn't mean that that the legislation is going to pass, but it means that as a community we have access to our assemblymen, we have access to the process, and for me, being part of the democratic process or whatever has been very invigorating. So 243 is the environment bill, and so it's a water discharge permit is what it's going to create, and it's going to be regulation through it's the State Water Resource Board. And so the discharge permit, in getting your discharge permit, which says as a farmer that you're not sending erosion or nutrients into the streams, what we're asking for in the legislation is that you would have access to the programs that small farmers traditionally have access to. So the extension programs through ATRA and the farmers market type situations and the UC extension research programs. So it's sort of a first step in a pathway to compliance for cannabis farmers. And for decades we've been building bigger sticks in Sacramento and no carrots. So we're asking that in exchange for a permit for a process that establishes compliance in environmental practices, farmers would then be eligible for a cultivation permit. And so it sets up a statewide regulation board that would, counties have individual choice on how they want to do it, but if they opt out, the state can then run the program for them if they don't want to. Counties that have bans, this is one of the questions for patients and stuff. So it's definitely, there's a lot of things to get sorted out. It made it through the Ag Committee on Wednesday, so that's the first time a cannabis bill has ever been heard in the Ag Committee, and the fact that it passed out of the Ag Committee was really, really big. So now it goes on to toxics and chemicals or something like that. It's the next committee. And so they'll have another hearing in a few weeks. The Senate bill, McGuire's Senate bill is SB 643, I think it's called. His bill seeks, he's getting money to help clean up the trespass grows and support Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so there's going to be some question about whether this funding is going to be for private land enforcement or public land enforcement. Ostensibly, thus far, it seems more focused on public land cleanups. So we'll see how that develops. Reggie Jones Sawyer and Rob Bonta is Assembly Bill 32, and Jones Sawyer's is 24 or 26. Sorry. And those are both we have very strong hopes for, especially Assemblyman Bonta's bill. We've been closely involved in the process with that, and at this point, Hezekiah has been building the relationships and making the office visits. He lives in Sacramento now full time, so we're starting to have a solid discussion about how do we create regulation. And there's, I wish I could speak better on all the other bills. For me, I joined the trade association because Hezekiah does that, and then he tells me what I need to know. And so I should have come more prepared to speak on the legislation, but I just, it's busy on the farm.
Well, I had a couple more things I wanted to say. It was because of people that I started writing for The Observer. And there was a wonderful series called the Cannabis Renaissance that the, of all places, Long Valley Garden Club held. And maybe some of you were there. But I started writing about it because they had lab owner Samantha Miller from Pure Analytics, who tests and measures cannabis and the ratio of THC and CBD and all sorts of things. We need a laboratory here desperately. People from Humboldt have to send their cannabis to Santa Rosa to be tested. So what an opportunity financially for Willits to get a first-rate testing lab. We could get all of Humboldt business. Oh, anyway. She was one of the incredible people. So was criminal defense attorney Ed Denson. And as those of you who heard him, anyway, we all know that one of the big problems is that marijuana is a Schedule I narcotic, and a lot of our problems start with that. So, and there's been stuff happening in Washington to try, there's some movement there. But what happens is anyone who grows is treated like a criminal and feels like a criminal. And that's the thing that's been discussed so much in Laytonville and has been so emotional for me, because it's not fun to feel like a criminal. It's not fun to feel like that helicopter might be landing. It's not fun to worry if you'll be busted for providing medicine, for trying to earn a living. It's not fun, and it's almost over, but it's not over yet. But I think working together, there's so many opportunities that this community, and I wanted to announce that tomorrow night, RJ and James Shields and I are meeting with Allison Glassy at the Mendocino County Museum to talk about a cannabis exhibition or display or museum. So we can get people not to bypass Willits, so we can get them here. Anyway, it's great. I think with the bypass people, it will be a real lure. And I just read that Real Goods is going to have a cannabis museum, and I called them a solar cannabis. I called, is it Schaefer, John Schaefer, and I never heard back. He said, let's talk, because there's no point in duplicating efforts. So that's kind of a positive thing. And anybody who wants to volunteer, unfortunately, the county museum has no money, so everything depends on volunteers, but there's a possibility of it going into a rail car that's been donated to the museum. And if people are good with hammer, there's so many aspects, they don't have paid curators, so RJ's going to help. And I've asked the author of this book, Smoke Signals, who lives in Healdsburg and is going to be my first guest on the Cannabis Hour. I've asked him to help us maybe work out a historical narrative timeline, starting with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics putting cannabis on, in the 20s and right up through, and Allen Ginsberg. There's so many cool, there's so much history in this. I hadn't a clue about it. I think I'll stop there and turn it over to Holly.
Thank you, Jane. I'm sorry you don't feel good. So I would like, this is going to get interactive, I would like you to raise your hand if you have anxiety about the future. Okay, now I would like you to raise your hand if you are confident that everything is going to be fine and that our economy is resilient and we will succeed after legalization. Okay, wonderful. So I think one thing that we can assuredly tell from this is that none of us know how it's going to pan out. I mean, we really are. That is perfect. That is a perfect analogy. Exactly. That things will remain hazy. And I do want to say, just right off the bat, that I do not have a particular expertise in this area. I think the organizers were planning on having someone else that maybe backed out, and I was able to fill in. But what I can speak to is public policy around legalization, which I think is incredibly important, and really how we deal with that. The primary way in which the city deals with cannabis culture is really on impacts to the economy. That's the primary way that we deal with things. And just recently I was able to go to an economic forum that was put on by business and ag interests down in Ukiah. They got a PhD economist to come. And let's just think about this. This is the Farm Bureau, the Employers Council, the NorCal Realtors Association. They asked this economist specifically to address legalization of cannabis. These are historically conservative groups that are very much interested in this transition process. And I thought it was fascinating. Basically, I can summarize for you. Things are generally looking up in Mendocino County, but not as up as in many other areas. So slide after slide, they would show us with the San Francisco Bay Area, so let's say property values. So San Francisco Bay Area, property values are going up, then Napa and Sonoma counties, and then down here at the bottom, Mendocino County and Lake County. Slide after slide, this is what, so I brought an example. This is per capita personal income in dollars. So these, and I have a couple of these in the back. So this shows up there at the top one is San Francisco, and then going down, Mendocino is that highlighted one, with Lake County being the one after us. So fascinating, and I have the whole report, and I can email it to people if they're interested. Then we come upon this slide, which is titled Retail Sales Income, County and State Level Percentage of Total Income. This highlighted bar at the top is us, Mendocino County, far above all San Francisco, everywhere. And we theorized in the room, because here we're talking about data that is unknown, right? So we're theorizing in the room that this is it. This is the cash economy's impact. This is the amount of cash per capita, so based on your income, that is flowing around Mendocino County. And we're at the top. I mean, this is an opportunity that we should seriously consider. So that's the question. Is this an opportunity or is this an obstacle? From a policy perspective, one option when legalization happens is to ignore it, to opt out. We all know the state of California is not uniform in our beliefs and opinions about things. So I am sure that there are going to be cities and there are going to be counties that choose, even if legalization happens, to say no. We want no part of it. And that is an option. If we chose that option, I think that the main impact we would have would be the negative economic impact. That's what we would experience, and not experience any of the opportunities. So that is an option. So if we think about it the other way, if we think about planning for it and how we could, grow as part of that process, I think that does make things get more interesting. We could be preparing infrastructure. The county and the city could develop policies around, zoning. Where is it okay to have a tasting room, where not? We could encourage someone, to open up an analysis lab. That's one of the economic benefits that I think could be done right away. And if that was begun here and started here, we'd really be able to, capitalize on that. We could. What we've been discussing is that we could put in place the rules that we want to see as a community. I mean, that's really our role. And we could choose, because we could shake off this black market cloud that really, I agree, kind of poisons everything in a way. As I mentioned, I don't have any particular expertise on this, but I can say that this is just me personally, as Holly, not as the City of Willits and not as any of the other groups that I participate in. But I do not see this as a panacea for Mendocino County. I don't see this as a cash cow, going forward. I think that over time it might be a bit of a wash. I think that there'll be a rough economic impact, but then going forwards, things might even out. And there's things I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to reduced crime. I'm looking forward to reduced illegal water diversions and environmental damage. I'm looking forward to a reduction in property values. As a young person, it's frustrating not to be able to afford property with a legal income, basically. And I'm really looking forward to a reduction in the stigma. I think that has become a big problem. I think that the people who are good business people, who have a good head on their shoulders, they're going to make it. Many people who have been able to get by because they've been able to get a certain amount per pound, those folks are probably not going to make it. And we as a county could choose to develop Mendocino County as an Appalachia. If we target high-end quality, it might give us a chance, frankly. Like Casey said, if Philip Morris is going to plant 1,000 acres of Bud Light in Sacramento, and they can use that term, if they can plant Bud Light, we're not going to compete with that. We're going to compete how we have with the wine industry, with having the most, we have this history of talent and of skill and of product. You have to show your water bottle. It says, life's too short to smoke cheap pot. Which is, that's a good way to put it. But what I really think this means, what this moment in time is a chance for us to look at ourselves and look at our community and see what we want. Do we want good paying jobs, for all ages? Then let's look at our school system. That's where we should do it. Do we want a thriving downtown, a beautiful community? Then get engaged with the city's planning. The city is working on a downtown planning process right now. Do we want to gain tourist volume? People who are going to come and visit and spend their dollars and then go away to the impacted cities that they live in? Then let's plan to have a post-legalization economy that is what we want. I mean, this is our, there's very few opportunities like this one where we're seeing it coming, and we could either choose to, ignore it and just whatever happens, happens, or we could plan the type of community that we want. So thank you all for having me, and I look forward to questions.